Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It's me, Addy, again, and I hope you guys haven't done anything to piss off the Greek gods. That's right, today we're going to be reviewing Hades, the latest and greatest game I've been playing over on Twitch, which I'm hoping the overwhelming redness of this video should have given away, which if it didn't, oh my goodness, may Hades incur his wrath upon thee. Shame on you. But jokes aside, I really wanted to play Hades 2 years ago when it came out, but I was never able to get around to it until now, that is, and I'm still playing it because this is without a doubt the most addicting roguelike I've played in a very long time. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now, this is the greatest roguelike I've ever played. So let's talk about why. So roguelike games at their core are about replayability, and how much incentive a game from this genre is able to give you to jump back in and do subsequent runs of it is what makes or breaks the game for me. So in this regard, most roguelikes I've played have been pretty damn solid. Void Bastards, Binding of Isaac, and Dead Cells are all very, very good examples of roguelikes I've played that do a good job of keeping me engaged and wanting to live, die, progress, and repeat, in-game of course. However, what Hades brings to the table, which I think is absolutely brilliant, is this feeling of excitement that I think most other roguelikes are sort of missing. And what I mean by that is this game makes you excited to keep playing when you die. Instead of feeling shitty, demotivated, and wanting to take a break before you go for another run, Hades makes you want to go back in immediately and jump back in for several reasons I'll be talking about in this review. And this is why, in my opinion, the game is ultimately so addicting and thus such an amazing roguelike. But the reason why I'm going to inevitably give this game the score that I will by the end of this review is because Hades isn't just a solid benchmark for a great roguelike, but it is also a shining example of stellar game design. Hades is just a fucking amazing video game overall at the end of the day. Dude, every little thing in this game is crafted with so much love and care by developer Supergiant Games. And as far as my personal checkbox for what makes a great video game goes, this one ticks all the boxes. A big one for me is pacing. If a game can get right into the action at the very start and give you a feel for what 90% of the gameplay experience will be like, much like my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy VII, where Cloud just hops off the train and starts mowing down a bunch of Shinra troops, then that is amazing. And Hades does just that. The game opens with two chilling lines that sum up the premise of the game, and just like that, you're thrown right into the action and get to let loose. And all of it is just so incredibly badass. Honestly, if there's one word I'd use to describe the feel of this game, it will be that 100 times over. Badass. With its incredible and just really, really good soundtrack, which is blood-pumping heavy metal music, and how you're swiftly slaying the darkest foes as the prince of the Greek underworld in various satisfying ways, the game reminded me so much of Doom, funnily, in the coolest way possible when it comes to its tone, which I think is, again, badass. And man, the gameplay loop here is amazing and so creatively executed because it ties in heavily to the game's narrative. Every single time you die as Prince Zagreus in an attempt to escape the underworld, you are reborn in your father Hades' palace and have to restart your run. And what's really cool here is that every single one of your deaths is a canon part of the game's story, since the characters around you will acknowledge those deaths with ever-changing dialogue that reveals more of the game's lore. And that blew my mind because I died so many times in this game, yet kept on hearing more and more and more new dialogue from the characters around me each time I respawned. It pretty much never got to the point, I don't think, where I exhausted a character's dialogue in this game and began hearing generic-ass lines from them, which is seriously impressive because it's clear that they recorded at least a gazillion different voice lines for different scenarios in this game. And they didn't just record lines here for when you die and respawn and the characters acknowledge that, but also for the ones besides that, such as the boss fights where Zagreus and the boss he fought earlier will continue their conversation from the previous run. I swear, the amount of detail here is just astonishing. And speaking of the characters and the story for that matter, they were done masterfully here. I've always found Greek mythology to be really fascinating with its wildly entertaining tales from the Pantheon, and Hades offers a story that is no different. And here with this game, we have an unrelenting Doom-like vibe with hints of lightheartedness that somehow works so well for an otherwise really grim and dour mythos. The simple yet gripping story of Zagreus wanting to ascend through his father's various layers of hell is one that I found myself so invested in. And the dynamics between Zagreus and the rest of the figures and deities of the Pantheon that he'll run into, many of whom will be familiar to you, was so entertaining to witness. The writing and comic relief were so on point here, and it really helped that the voice acting was flawless as well. I never once found myself skipping every little conversation in the game, and just loved the journey of Zagreus here. He's a really surprisingly well fleshed out and likable character. And that's a rarity with most roguelikes, by the way. I've never before found a roguelike to have an interesting main character or a really good story for that matter, but Hades absolutely changed that for me. It managed to have both a solid narrative and stellar gameplay at the very same time. And yo, let's talk about the gameplay itself, right? I mean, that's a really important part of the game, of any game really. So over here, I loved it. The brutal hack and slash of Hades is so satisfying as you mow through hundreds of fearsome spawns of hell. And on each run, you get to select one of 6 different unique weapons with very, very different playstyles to keep things fresh, which I thought was amazing. And the weapons are the only thing that are fresh each run, but the levels themselves are fresh as fuck too, since you'll be going through an ever-changing layout of each level on your run due to the game's procedural generation, which is very, very well done here, by the way. So yeah, this game has a lot of randomization, and not just with the levels, but also with what you get in them. The biggest gameplay perk, of course, being the gods you encounter, such as Zeus, Ares, Poseidon, and way more, all of whom seek to assist you in your ascent with various ability of theirs that you can mix and match for some really dope builds. And that was a really cool thing about this game. I'd pretty much go into each run not knowing which gods I would encounter, and I'd still end up somehow with the most unapologetically wacky combination of god and weapon abilities that made for an incredibly fun build. I don't think I had a single run in this game that made me go, oh fuck, that RNG, man, that sucked. That was some really bad luck there. I hated my build, that wasn't fun at all. But rather, the way I went with most of my runs was like, oh shit, that's really interesting. I never thought this combo of abilities would work out so well. And they do. This shit is fun. Every single time I died here, I was so eager to go back in to see what crazy combination of gods I'd get next, because this game was clearly made with the intention of everything meshing together really well, regardless of what random perk you'd end up getting on your run. And one really interesting thing that this did was it absolutely challenged my view of how heavy randomization in games will inevitably be a bad thing, which is something I said in my Crisis Core review video I made a long time ago. And with Hades, I was so happy to be sort of proven wrong here on that point. Another thing here is that Hades is a game with solid presentation. It doesn't do anything we haven't seen before when it comes to gameplay mechanics, but the way it executes familiar concepts with its unique aesthetic and setting is what makes all of it feel so fresh, original, and fun. And the visual direction and art style definitely helps with that a lot. The game is so vibrant and pleasing to look at, with its colorful environments and beautiful character illustrations, and the isometric perspective, which has so much depth to it. And here's a funny thing about the perspective, by the way. The perspective was honestly one of my favorite things about the game. I've always thought the bird's eye view angle in games was cool, but unfortunately I was never able to get into most games that employed them, such as Diablo. However, here it was different, and that's because Hades' riveting hack and slash combat is right up my alley, which finally gives me an experience with the isometric view that was actually fun for me, and that's something I greatly appreciate. God, this is a really, really good game. Everything is just so layered here. On paper, Hades doesn't really boast a whole lot of content, right? There are only 4 levels in this game, not a whole lot of gods you encounter in your runs, only 6 weapons, but as soon as you actually see how much more content each of these little things offer you, with things like how the levels are brimming with new content each run, the myriad of abilities you get from every god, and the weapon upgrades, and of course the crazy amount of dialogue that each character has in this game, you soon realize that there is more content here than what initially meets the eye. And on top of that, all these elements mesh together in so many different ways, and in doing so adds so much to the game's replayability. So ultimately, Hades is a game that stresses quality over quantity to the highest possible degree, to where it's so incredibly difficult for me personally to think of any flaws in this game. There's no such thing as a perfect game, right? There isn't, absolutely not. But there are ones where there are flaws that are easy to spot, and ones where not even a microscope could spot them. And Hades easily falls into the latter. For that reason, I'm giving Hades a solid 10 out of 10. I can confidently say that this game dethrones Dead Cells as my favorite roguelike of all time. And I now consider myself a certified super uber hard mega super giant games fan, and will definitely keep my eyes out for more games by these developers. And yo, like I said at the start of this video, I'm not even done playing Hades, man. We just beat the game not long ago, and oh my goodness, yo. Without going into spoilers, that ending does such a good job of incentivizing you to keep on playing. And the post-game content here is nuts. So we're definitely hitting up all of that still. So if you want to check that out and see hours of me just gushing over this game, feel free to check me out over on twitch.tv/irritableidian. The door is always open and the link to that is in the description below. I'd love to see you there, and the streams are on the weekends. Also remember to subscribe if you enjoyed this review. I'd greatly appreciate it. But until the next one, you guys, keep on keeping on.